Well, finally tonight, in the next few weeks, there will be a lot of attention on upstate New York for the fall foliage. According to the state's tourism website, most of the area is just starting to turn this week, with peak season happening around Columbus Day weekend. And almost as predictable as the changing seasons is the ongoing debate of exactly what is considered upstate New York. Being in Western New York, it is fun to watch people who have likely never made it this far down the thruway duke it out over something that seems so wildly stupid. But where does upstate start? And does it matter? Having lived in Albany for a decade, I can tell you this debate does get ugly, and so, I imagine, can Alexandra Zissu. She is a contributing editor for the Times-Union Hudson Valley and recently wrote about this topic. Thanks so much for being with us to talk about it tonight.
I'm happy to continue talking and talking. Thank you so much for having me.
You know,
I have made it all the way out to you, and I'm personally in the Hudson Valley tonight.
Oh, perfect. Well, often this discussion is in good fun, but people do have very serious opinions about what constitutes upstate New York. So why wade into the debate, and why now?
Honestly, so during the pandemic, I'm born and raised in New York City, and I've been living in the Hudson Valley for about 10 years. And sort of during the pandemic, a huge amount of people moved up from New York City to the Hudson Valley. So there's sort of this protagonist, antagonist stuff going on of newcomers and old comers. And it just felt like a good time to revisit. And my editor heard this idea that newly people were defining upstate as where the Stewart shops start. And Stewart shops are these tiny little shops. Are they all the way up in Buffalo? I don't even know.
No, not quite this far.
No. So I guess people are less passionate about Stewart's than they are about Wegmans, which I learned from a babysitter I had who was born and raised in Rochester. And, you know, I just thought it was a cute idea, and we started playing with it. And I guess people are feeling very passionate about it right now. So it kind of took off. You know, again, I was born and raised in New York City, where some of my childhood friends think that upstate is anything above 14th Street in Manhattan. It's, you know, so they're totally ridiculous. And then all the people who, you know, are trying to look from Albany down to me in the Hudson Valley say I'm not upstate are also ridiculous. And so I just had fun with it. You are truly upstate.
Yes, far upstate. You make a good point about people sort of discovering New York State around the pandemic, because I certainly know people here in Buffalo who had never been to the Adirondacks, and vice versa. People who I knew from the Albany area had never really been in this direction. So people sort of learn to explore more. I'm interested about the response that you got online, and if there were any common threads in the argument, and why you think people are so passionate about where they are and what it's called.
I think everybody is really having a tough time, like, staking out their claim and defining their sense of self through so much change. So it's not only the newcomers that moved into my area during the pandemic, it's the whole political landscape. There's just, everybody wants to say, this is who I am, and you can't tell me that I'm not. And I just want to listen to anyone who feels passionate about some definition that really doesn't bother some people. And I don't, you know, it's always interesting to see what becomes like a huge touch point. It's not like this conversation hasn't been had before. As you say, you were in Albany, you've watched people have this conversation before. Obviously, between Albany and New York City, there's always that upstate competition. You know, it was interesting to see that right now, as we're all really trying to remember who we were and redefine who we are, this is really a touch point again.
We just have a little under a minute, and I just want to ask you kind of quickly, does it matter, you know, overall? Is there a reason why we really need to establish these boundaries, or is it just kind of this fun conversation we continue to have?
You know, to answer that, I'll say that there's a woman in the Biden administration who responded to me on Twitter when I was first starting to report this. And she says that as a Black woman, she always defines herself as an upstate New Yorker, because some people say that she can't be from upstate New York as a Black woman. And so to me, that is the number one answer that truly matters. If somebody's going to tell you that you can't be who you are, that's not okay. So then it does matter. And then on the sillier side, of course, none of this silly part matters. It's just a lot of fun, and it's a way to blow off steam and maybe a way to get to know your neighbor. But so on the one hand, it matters if somebody's telling you who you are and who you can't be. And on the other hand, the rest of it, I think, is just pure fun. And, you know, maybe this is a wake up call to other people who need to understand that you can drive for many, many hours in New York State and still be in New York State.
It's a great perspective. I'm glad we got to have the chat. We've been talking with Alexandra Zissu. She's a contributing editor for the Times Union Hudson Valley. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.